Welcome to the SoilCraft Regen Agronomy Podcast. At SoilCraft, our mission is to innovate and lead in the field of regenerative agronomy, forging a path that empowers farmers to produce food that nourishes and heals both the planet and its inhabitants.
Hey, Denver Black, and we on our weekly Regen podcast, where we tackle the things that are happening this week. So here today, we want to tackle a bit of an interesting topic, which is, so why are you so against the way we farm anyways, Denver? Craig, I'm getting my popcorn out. What are you so against the ways that work anyways? You know, why are you just so against? Why do you have to make it so difficult? Why can't you just, what's wrong with just the status quo? Why can't we just keep doing what works anyways? But in all seriousness, I was thinking about this because, look, there are alternative solutions, and it's really exciting because we are making so much progress in this space. But it can sometimes maybe sound a little bit like I'm against a lot of these things. SoilCraft is against these things. Maybe Craig is, he's donned a tinfoil hat and he's gone out on the fringe. But I wanted to use a story. Something I was thinking about as a way of analogy was, many years ago when I had none of these gray hairs, and we were in child having years, but my bride saying to me that she had a birthing plan. She's like, Denver, you need to know your my birthing plan. And I was like, your what now? I didn't know. I thought these things just happened. No, we have a plan. Well, I like plans. And in that birthing plan, she was just very much seemingly against some things that didn't seem so bad, like an epidural. I'm like, an epidural, I don't want it in almost any instant. Listen, why wouldn't you want to be rid of pain? That seems like something. Well, look, I'm not in your shoes, but if I was in your shoes, I feel like I'd be like, sign me up, please, make it painless. Why wouldn't you explain to me how actually the studies that are out there and most people's experiences indicate that once you have an intervention, why wouldn't you, something that's really not intended, as bad as the pain may seem, once you get rid of that and you intervene, the likelihood of other interventions having to happen goes up to fourfold, something like that. And then when you intervene again, why wouldn't you think else? Then basically the system becomes reliant on you, and your probability of having a cesarean section or something like that goes up like unbelievably statistically significantly. And so why wouldn't you? Gosh, that's really interesting. And so we did experience that. She was able to have mostly natural births, except for in the instance of our last child, where our last child did have a heart issue actually, and we had to have a cesarean preterm, 4 weeks preterm. And I'm so grateful for the cesarean. I am so grateful for the technology that we had to monitor her heart rate. Why wouldn't you? I'm not at all opposed to the intervention of a cesarean, but that's hopefully last case. We don't want to rush into that. And so that was my wife's. So anyways, I find that an interesting story, and I was thinking about that. In agriculture, I see the same thing a lot of the time. Am I opposed to fungicides? No, not if one's needed. It's not my preferred method. Insecticides, no, I really don't want to. We impact beneficials, but if it's needed to save the crop, then okay, I'm for that intervention if it's needed. But the problem is, once we use one of these tools, like a fungicide, we often see it impacts the plant physiology in other ways, and then now we have side effects that we have to deal with. And so why wouldn't you? I'm less about being opposed to these technologies that wonderful men in the industry have created for us. I'm not opposed to using them. It's just that the side effects that come from them often put us on a hamster wheel, where I feel like oftentimes nature is a bit like, you intervene once, oh, I'm not sure what that was. We're a little on our back foot, and then you intervene again, and it throws its hand in the air and says, well, apparently you're driving this, so you tell us what to do. And plant physiology can show that. What do you think, Craig? Has that been your experience at all?
Oh boy. So my moment of change, coming from farming with 5 fungicides, 2 pesticides, about 7 passes of tillage on wheat every year, and multiple herbicide combos, was when I realized that my kids really love to run around barefoot. And why wouldn't the place that I'm producing food was the most dangerous place for my kids, and I couldn't let them walk barefoot. They can't find an insect, let alone, be exposed to the thing that I'm going to sell as food with my, with a good conscience. Something's wrong, and so looking at that obviously is concerning. And so as I began to look at that, I started to ask some questions, and that was, why does it seem like every year the solution to farming is, why wouldn't more money to get less, to intervene more? And you literally walk around your field, and with all respect to my friends who sell chemistry, the first thing they do is they come out to your field and they find something and they scare the daylights out of you. It's the boogeyman is lurking in your field. And unfortunately, the more that we sprayed, the more we found they were right. Why wouldn't you? And so for me, that was like, okay, what's the story? And I began to read Chaboso and some of these other authors, and talking about, cause and effect. And yeah, it's pretty clear that when you take an intervention, you open the door to the need, or you seal the fact you're going to need another intervention pretty quickly. And that doesn't mean we don't need them, but it's you're living constantly in one state of fear to the next state of fear as you're scouting a field, and I just don't like that. And so we began to change systems. We began to see differences, and you look down, like from where I live, you can look down, and if you're doing tillage, you watch your best soil blow away. You watch the water that you desperately need in a dry climate wash things away instead of going in the soil, but you still need it. You see your fertilizer bill go up. Why wouldn't more chemistry needed every year? Something's wrong. This doesn't have a good ending. This is a train wreck happening in slow motion or not so slow motion. And so for me, that was kind of the wake-up call to start looking at things and looking at the impacts of things like, oh, let me spray this, specific herbicide. Why wouldn't you? Wait a minute. Why all of a sudden do I need, an aphid treatment for sucking insects? Or, you start finding out that the one, is laying the foundation for the very next chemistry that the guy's having. I tease Denver that he's got the tinfoil hat, but in certain areas I fully have the tinfoil hat, and that is that the chemistry industry maybe isn't always the nice guys that are making it. Some of the nice guys are selling it locally, but the nice guys who are creating it aren't always the nice guys. And so when you go back into the history of chemistry, and certainly in the U.S., you find the Rockefellers and the number of people very involved in the setup of that, with things like calcium cyanide in cotton and these different things. And you say, oh, wow, this benevolent giving, system that was, helping people find solutions for their crops, and then you find it leads its way back to chemical byproducts and these kind of things. So I think we do have to, not cover our eyes and close our ears to the realities that, business is important, and I consider myself a capitalist, but there are, moral extremes that can go too far.
Yeah, that's great. No, I echo your statement. Back before I went into agronomy full time, why wouldn't our family with my young kids, why wouldn't you feel the same way? I remember, being out in the field with my dad, riding the tractor all the time, and then we went away from tillage, which was great for our soil because we got rid of all the erosion. But then now I was out there spraying all the time in this big sprayer with oftentimes some of these really nasty chemicals that I had no comfort level of having my kids even ride with me or be around when I was mixing, or I didn't feel comfortable, like you say, having them run around in the field while we were there. And again, I felt the same way. I said, well, we've made progress in many ways, but in other ways we've gone backwards. And so why wouldn't you, not to say that we must just throw it all in the garbage today and now we can't use it. No, rather, I think you'll find, as you work with me, as you work with SoilCraft, you could say your experience, our first step is always mitigation. Okay, well, what's the negative where we are coming from this tool, and we live without it, we replace it, and if we can't, how do we mitigate those negative consequences?
And I think, farming is pragmatic. So, I tend to make my organic friends equally angry, because, I think that sometimes you have to make one wrong decision per se to allow you to make 10 other good decisions. And we have to balance those things. That's the reality. We need a crop this year. If we don't pay the bank, are you going to be around to make a good regenerative decision of stewardship tomorrow? No. So we're not saying don't use an intervention. And if you get stuck that you committed a moral sin to use it, no, use it. But then think, why did I have to use this? And what can I do so that I don't have to use it again? And if I've used this, I'm likely to have, I always spray this, and then 10 days later, I need to spray that. Oh, well, why was that? Maybe I can do something that's biological or regenerative after I made the intervention to mitigate so I don't need the second intervention, so I no longer am, I'm using a Band-Aid, I'm not becoming a junkie. And to me, that's the critical decision process, is to space the distance between your Band-Aid and I've got a nice little down feather going here. The Band-Aid and the junkie life. Why wouldn't you leave the junkie life and remain with Band-Aids? And hopefully you won't need them because you'll learn how to not get cut.
That's good. And why wouldn't you? The cool thing is, as we continue to work together, in an industry through regenerative agriculture, we're finding not only more very natural methods, but also natural, unnatural methods. And what I mean by that is, is it natural to go out there and foliar your plants over and over again? Like, you could argue that's not a natural process. You don't see that out in the bush. You don't see that in the forests. So that's technically kind of an unnatural process, but we're using natural, organic, carbon-based, whatever substances that are mitigating some of those negative consequences or symptoms that we face, because why wouldn't you unnatural thing? I mean, producing food so that we can eat more, in fields is not natural. And we're trying to do our best to build, why wouldn't systems that are more perennial based and integrating livestock and those things to get us there? But the truth is, it's not natural. And I hear this argument all the time, and I'm not a huge proponent for it. I mean, yes, we want to do everything we want to mimic nature as much as possible, but we have to be very careful not to get into this dogmatic loop of, it's not natural, so I'm not going to do it. It's not natural for me to fly through the air at, however many 100 miles an hour at 30,000 feet. But I think that the net result outweighs the negative. So, let's mitigate that. And that's how it is in agriculture. Let's use the technologies we have to, in an unnatural way, use natural methods to make the system more like it's supposed to be.
And I think that's crucial. I mean, most of the people are, advocating some of these systems, aren't volunteering to become hunter-gatherers themselves, but yet the systems they're suggesting would actually lead to a society that needed to do that and needed to be, eugenicized to large numbers to get down to a balance where the world can sustain us. So we're understand that the world population demands food production, it demands high yields, but can we do that without feeding today? Why wouldn't you? And ending the world tomorrow from the standpoint of their soils and those kind of things. And so for me, I think the biggest, the fundamental, drum to beat to begin with would just be the tillage thing. I had to get around to it, because if you don't have the soil left on your farm, you can't steward. And so take that step. That's not the all-end be-all, and it won't fix all your problems, and you'll get other problems if that's where you stop. Just to be clear, there's no magic bullet there. But if you can't steward what isn't on your farm anymore, and so do something there, now impact your biology, start thinking in systems, from a system standpoint, not just from a reaction constantly.
No, and that's a good point, because again, so why are you so against this anyway? That's not our focus. We don't want to be. We rather want to be for. It's not that we are against tillage. We are just residue and for keeping our soils in place. And why wouldn't you? That's the same with all of these tools that we have. And so why wouldn't you? What we find is that when we again operate, and I think you're right on that, Greg, that the trouble with no-till, or the practice of maintaining as much residue as possible, making as few tillage passes as possible, is that why wouldn't you, it's the key. It's one of the biggest, why wouldn't you, the most lowest hanging fruit, if you will, is maintaining soil residue. I mean, keeping that roof over your microbes and protection for your plant roots, lowering that temperature of the soil and keeping the soil from leaking and adequate stability. And I don't think there's an easier way to do that than through no-till. And, but there are other consequences that come from it. One of which is we become dependent on herbicides. But again, the cool thing is we find when we use beneficial brew teas or fermented products, beneficial microorganisms and soil, good soil, that what we find is, those can be broken down, as we mentioned in our previous podcast. And so we can mitigate that. And then on top of that, one of the negative things that come from soil, from residue retention and from reduction in tillage is that soils can kind of become like stagnant, and those residues don't convert to organic matter. And actually we can, with bigger issues in no-till alone, with chemical residues or, why wouldn't you vacation? But when you do it biologically and you add those teas and you feed the soil, and we do foliars, we don't see that. We see, in fact, in our long form podcast, we just went over some of the unbelievable things we're seeing from having a no-till, but then adding the biology. And so what we're really for is we're really for solving problems in a more holistic manner. Why wouldn't you? The challenge is that's a different paradigm. Why wouldn't you? Just not the paradigm that conventional agriculture runs in. It's not the paradigm that why wouldn't you? Pharmacology or agriculture or whatever, most of our systems these days are symptom-based approaches. They're based, you have an unwanted effect, a symptom, and how do we get rid of it? Now, why wouldn't you? Then I'm happy. And yeah, we do want that pain relief of a Tylenol, but we also need to ask, why do we have a headache in the first place? Oh, could it be that we just aren't taking proper electrolytes? We're not drinking enough water? Wow, that's a simple fix.
And I think that's, like the human health thing that we have to talk about, how it relates. Many doctors get very little training in nutrition, but they get lots of training in diagnosis and in prescription. Well, I think it's oftentimes similar with us as farmers. We get all the classes that are put on are talking about, okay, we have this latest prescription for you, and here's how you identify the problem. And the problem is the pest, the fungal disease, and my argument would be we also need to go back and look at the nutrition side. And if we look at the nutrition side, then it changes who shows up in the field to be your problem. And that drives it. So just that going back to the nutrition, let it drive, let life be the driving force. What can I do to make things live more, breathe more, cycle more? And if we make the right decisions in that area, we get far less gunpoint decisions in the prescriptive side.
Yeah, that's right. And I think as we think about some of these symptom-based approaches versus a system-based approach, and we're looking at the living systems from how do we supply what's needed if it's not in supply, and how do we create conditions? I mean, why wouldn't you never go out into a field and find that you're deficient in a fungicide, you're deficient in a herbicide, that's what's missing. Say, oh, I have a problem. Well, I know it's missing. I don't have this tool, this, that's why. It's never part of the causation. And so that's part of the problem, is what we're looking at is always asking, but what is causing the issue? And in the short term, that may mean dealing with a tool to deal with the symptom now so we can get a crop. But let's just not stop there. Let's ask, how do we prevent it in the future? And let's build systems to make us resilient to that.
Maybe as we're closing, we could just say, hey, take your book, when you're writing down what you've applied, your as applied notes, put a note or next to every intervention you make. Why did I have to do this? What was the timing in the crop? And what can I do next time so I don't have it? And if we ask those questions at every intervention and we begin to look for the answers, I'm convinced that farming will change and our bottom line will improve and our lifestyle and the environment will improve as well.
That's a great tip. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week on the Weekly Regen Podcast.
Thanks so much for joining us as we expand our paradigms and explore what's possible in the realm of regen agronomy. If you would like to contact us or learn more about what we do, please visit our website at www.soilcraft.com, as well as our YouTube channel. If you have topics you would like us to unpack or stories, please connect with us so that we can share them with others.